Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Portuguese Immigrant Weekend California presentation. Every day in the morning, here we are with you with a presentation about one aspect or another of the Portuguese immigrant experience, not just the immigrant, but obviously our Portuguese experience in California is one of many generations, as we've tried to bring this to you in the different lectures and also the panel presentations that we have put forth throughout the last week. And we will continue until Friday here as part of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI collection of different presentations related to the Portuguese Immigrant Week in California. Once again, Portuguese Immigrant Week in California was first declared in 1967 by then Governor Ronald Reagan. It has been declared the first full week of March, Portuguese Immigrant Week, by all of the other governors as well. It is something that we should all, as a community, treasure and work hard at it. And I've been saying this for a few years already. I know people are getting tired of it, but I will continue. I think we should work harder and harder at it in order to utilize this week to have a bigger presence of the Portuguese Americans in whatever type of service that we are in, or whether we are in public service, education, the arts, agriculture, business, technology, et cetera, services, construction, many facets of the Portuguese American experience are also, of course, part of our multicultural experience here in the state of California. So it is indeed Portuguese Immigrant Week. It will be until Friday, and we will be having our daily presentations, 2 per day, in the morning around 8 and 1 in the evening at 5 o'clock. The ones in the evening are usually either interviews, conversations, or panel presentations as well. Today, we're going to talk to you for the next 25 to 30 minutes or so about the Portuguese Americans in public service. So we have featured Portuguese literary expressions. We have talked about the fraternal movement and the festas, the social aspect of the community. We have talked about the early immigrants. We have talked about the role of the Portuguese media. And today we're going to be talking about Portuguese Americans in California public service, something that we all should be very proud as a number, considering the number of Californians who are of Portuguese ancestry. As all of you know, the official number is around 350,000 people. And we all know there are a few more because people don't take the time to do that in the census, although there's been different publicity that has been done, especially in the 2020 census, which we have not got numbers yet for the ethnicity part of it. Should be coming soon, hopefully before the next census. But it will be, so the 2020, there was a bit of publicity done at a national level, at a local level as well, and different folks got involved and tried their best, absolute best, to bring awareness to the community. Did it result? Did it not result? Who knows? Because of we'll soon find out, hopefully. And because of this ever-changing reality in the Portuguese American community that we've been talking different parts of the different presentations that we've had this week, and that is that according to the same census, and that's based on the census and updates from the American Survey, which is a unit of the census that works closely with the census and based on census numbers and updates information on a yearly basis. And according to their numbers and what they have put out, there are Portuguese, at least 25 or more, obviously, in over 500 cities in California. And so the community is very, very different than what it was, obviously, 100 years ago, and certainly even 50 years ago. In the last 40 to 50 years, the last 40 years, there's been hardly no immigration as far as large numbers are concerned from the Azores, from Madeira, and from mainland Portugal to California. And in the last 50 plus years, especially, I would say in the last 50 to 60 years, we already saw quite a bit of it in the 70s, which is the change in demographics. In other words, folks that were immigrating in the 60s and 70s, of course, came to the same areas that their families lived. But those who had been here, those who had been born here, and it was maybe in their parents or in some cases their grandparents in the 1970s, it was their grandparents who had immigrated. They were already moving to different cities throughout the state of California that were not known, quote unquote, as typical Portuguese areas. And so considering that we are around 350,000 officially, maybe we can bump that up to 400 or 450,000 or even 500,000, but certainly that 1 million that's been touted around, that's so wrong. I mean, if you look at the numbers of people that immigrated throughout the time, the numbers there from Portugal, we'd have to multiply it at a very fast pace in order to reach that million plus, as people say. But certainly we are probably 450 to 500,000. And even with those numbers, it's impressive the number of Portuguese Americans who are in public service in California, considering, of course, as I said, those numbers. And so a little bit about the Portuguese in public service, and most of the information that I'll be giving you will be from two different sources. One of them is from this source, which is this wonderful book that Professor Al Graves, Dr. Al Graves, published, and he published this quite a few years ago. It's a wonderful book, and if you don't have it, I would highly recommend it. California Portuguese Politicians: A Century of Legislative Work. And it is from that work that I will be sharing some information with you. And so there's a picture of a professor, not retired, emeritus, and he was in business for a while as well, Dr. Al Graves, and the numerous months, I would say years actually, that he took with researching this book and coming up with it. So the book concentrates on the California's Portuguese politicians, a century of legislative service, on those who have been elected to the state assembly, to the state senate, and to Congress. So it doesn't talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, it doesn't talk about those who were elected to local positions, as in county supervisors, as in mayors, as in city council, and even school boards, etc. And there indeed is a need for that work as well, as Professor Al Graves had mentioned at that particular time. But it was just too large of a scope in order to do this book. This is already a very wonderful book with lots of information, concentrating, narrowing it down to the Californians in Portuguese, the California Portuguese politicians, or those who served at a state level when it comes to legislative service. And so a little bit about some of the things that I'll be mentioning, as I said, will be exactly from this book. And so let me read just a little bit of an excerpt from this wonderful book by Professor Al Graves. And he talks about these, starts off the book actually in the introduction by talking about these three men who were basically those who initiated the process of having Californians in public office as far as the state legislature is concerned. And so basically the very first one you see is there, John G. Matos. And so I will quote now and read from the book. With great excitement and animation, the popular periodical União Portuguesa announced in its edition of November 15th, 1900, so exactly 100, just about 123 years ago, that John G. Matos Jr. had won the recent election for the California State Assembly, representing District 46. Of the 2,930 votes cast in this rural Alameda County Assembly District, 60% went to John G. Matos Jr., a first-generation immigrant. So he had immigrated from the island of Fayal in the Azores, making him the very first Portuguese Californian to ascend to a state-level political position in 1900. Nearly, so November of this year will be 123 years. Little imagination is required to envision the dimension of the news in the community of nearly 5,000 first-generation Portuguese immigrants who lived in Alameda County in 1900. The word spread like wildfire as each and every one of its purveyors exclaimed with unequaled exuberance, as did União Portuguesa, Matos Júnior está eleito, foi eleito Matos Júnior, to the California State Assembly in Sacramento. This never would have happened in the Azores. It had never happened here. Why? Barely 20 years prior, Matos had arrived from the island of Fayal to join a young Portuguese Californian community that was primarily unskilled and plagued by, at that time, illiteracy. They were not ready for politics. 2 decades after Matos' election, the next gentleman there, and the one off to the complete right, Christian, E.H. Christian, a native also of the Azores, and he came from Pico Island, became the second Portuguese immigrant in California to win a state-level political position, and he was elected to the California State Assembly in 1920, so 20 years later after John G. Matos was elected. Matos from Fayal, and E.H. Christian, of course, an Americanized name, from the island of Pico. And he was elected in 1920 and 1922 to the state Senate in 1924 and 1928. By this time, the Portuguese foreign-born population of Alameda County had grown to about 9,500 people. There is little evidence to suggest that this accomplishment was received with the same enthusiasm as was the election of his predecessor, rightly so, for Matos's accomplishment could not be duplicated. And sandwiched between Matos and Christian, so in there in the middle, a sandwich right between there, is Antone Rogers, and was another Portuguese Californian who won state-level political office. And again, his name, Antone A. Rogers, the son of respected San Leandro pioneer Antonio Rogers. In 1910, Rogers won a seat in the State Assembly representing Alameda County and served 1 term. He was the first American-born offspring of a Portuguese immigrant to win a seat in the state legislature. The other 2 were immigrants. He was, of course, American-born. These 3 men, John G. Matos, Anton A. Rogers, and E.H. Christian, were California's pioneer Portuguese politicians indeed when it comes to state level. Scant attention has been paid to their accomplishments of these 3 men by practicing scholars, and that is so true. Except for the archival record, only a few short articles in a small number of books and periodicals tell of their existence. Thus, to most people, including many serious students of the Portuguese community in California, these facts have been news, and they were news until, of course, this wonderful book that Dr. Graves published about 20 years ago. So others that were, of course, selected followed, these 3 pioneers. So that now 1, but 2 first-generation immigrants from the Azores served the combined 18 years in the California state legislature before beginning the Great Depression is indeed, as Dr. Al Graves writes, and we all, of course, would agree, a significant fact and worthy of more than a scant mention in the annals of the Portuguese Californians. So that's one of the reasons why Dr. Graves dedicated a lot to these 3 key men who were they were, of course, the pioneers for the Portuguese presence at a state level. And so he has quite a bit of time and quite a bit of space dedicated to, of course, to their service and to their pioneer spirit in getting involved in the American, and in this case, very Californian political service. And a little bit also quoting from the book, from the time that E.H. Christian left the legislature at the end of 1930 until 1963, this is very significant, no recognizable Portuguese Californian held political office at the state or federal level, save one possible exception, which was George P. Miller. Although only 1/4 Portuguese, Miller does deserve recognition, for his paternal grandfather was a well-known and well-respected pioneer immigrant in the Sacramento area. Miller served 2 terms in the California State Assembly from 1937 to 1940, and 14 terms in the United States House of Representatives from 1945 to 1972. So lots of times we look at some of the key political figures that were elected in the 70s and 80s, but these folks were there. And as Dr. Alan Graves mentions, George P. Miller was Portuguese, obviously, a quarter Portuguese from his paternal grandfather, but he was Portuguese, and he served a long time, the 14 terms in Congress, I should say. He, along with a second Californian, which was Assemblyman Jim Silva, and 3 non-Californians, Antonio Joseph of New Mexico, Ben Nighthorse Campbell of Colorado, and Patrick Toomey of Pennsylvania, will be given scant attention because they fail to meet one or more of the following criteria that, of course, he set up for this book. But indeed, especially George P. Miller was a Portuguese American and was a quarter Portuguese, and as you mentioned, the grandson of a very respected Portuguese pioneer in the Sacramento area. And so these are the 3 pioneers, and those that I've just mentioned as well. And if we go a little bit further, as we will try to explore a few other names in the Portuguese presence, and these are the following 2. So in 1963, as Dr. Graves mentioned, between 30 and 63, other than Miller, there was no one else. And along with Jim Silva, there was no big names, and they weren't also on a continual basis. So beginning in 1963, several people of Portuguese descent achieved state-level political office in California. And the first was, as you can see there on the right side, Joseph A. Gonçalves, a dairy farmer from the Southern California town of Cerritos. Yes, Cerritos was a town, as all of you who know a little bit of the Portuguese history know, in the 1950s, 60s, and even 70s. Gonçalves was elected to the California State Assembly in 1962 and served 12 consecutive years. In 1967, Gonçalves was joined in the assembly by a young man whose number of consecutive terms in office would be eclipsed by none, neither Portuguese nor non-Portuguese, in the history of the state of California. His name was John Vasconcelos, and he would serve 38 consecutive years in the California legislature, 30 in the assembly and 8 in the Senate, and became known as the Dean of the California legislature. The 1967-68 session was the first time that 2 people of Portuguese descent served in the California state legislature at the same time. And so it all began a different era. Although Gonçalves left the assembly at the end of 73-74 session, other Portuguese Californians were added, and we'll talk about those as well. And so Frank Vicencia won the campaign to represent a portion of Los Angeles County. Vicencia held his seat for nearly 12 consecutive years. In 1976, Henry Melo of Santa Cruz, there on the left, won his campaign for the assembly and kept that seat for a second term before then serving 8 terms as California state senator. With the addition of Melo to Vicencia and Vasconcelos, the 1977-78 session was the first time that 3 persons of Portuguese descent served concurrently in the California state legislature. In the summer of 1977, almost 8 decades after John G. Matos Jr. won his first race for California State Assembly, the Fresno Bee ran a story entitled "Developments Renew Speculation. Will Sisk Retire?" The article read, "As surely as the cotton begins to bloom about this time every 2 years, or did, the rumors and speculation begin. Will Representative B.F. Sisk, the veteran Fresno congressman, retire? And the article notes two particular developments that might this time prove the rumor mongers correct. Congressman Sisk had recently purchased a new home for $133,000 in 1977, and the Fresno's north side at an address that, oddly enough, noted to be, is not in Sisk's 15th congressional district. Concurrently, the Sisk administrative assistant, Tony Coelho, who hopes to run for Congress once Sisk retires, is in the process of buying a house in Merced. Aha, that's it. The political observers surely exclaimed. And indeed, Congressman Sisk did retire at the end of the 95th congressional session, and Anthony Lee Coelho, right here, a third-generation descendant of immigrants from the Azores Islands, in this case from the island of Terceira, became the first broadly recognized Portuguese Californian to ascend the national political office. To most, that fact is not news, for Coelho's appearance on the national political stage was applauded throughout the Portuguese American community, as it was in the Azores and in mainland Portugal. The accomplishment had been a long time in the making. And so it may not be news today, but obviously in 1977, 78, or in 78, when he ran, it was a big thing for the Portuguese American community. As Dr. Algraves mentioned, there had been someone there before for 14 terms. George P. Miller, only a quarter Portuguese, but he was full, as we call full-blooded Portuguese, and a grandson of an immigrant from the island of Terceira in the Azores. Of course, Coelho did lots of great work in Congress, and became and still is a national key political figure within the Democratic Party and across party lines as well. And of course, he was widely known to have a very, very special relationship with Portugal, and to stand up and to take notice and to promote the so-called Portuguese American causes. Then throughout, of course, the 1970s, 1980s, up until the early 1990s, there were quite a few Portuguese Americans that were elected to statewide office, whether it be to the Assembly or to the Senate. And there are some of them right here, as you can see. And so, and one of those people was Congressman Jim Costa, who we'll talk about a little bit later. But in 1983, John Rusty Reyes, representing portions of Merced, Monterey, San Benito, and Santa Clara counties, joined the California Assembly. And the session of 83-84 of the California legislature became the first in which 5 members were of Portuguese descent. In that year, Assembly Vasconcelos, Costa, Vicencia, and Reyes, and former Assemblyman Joe Gonçalves were joined by Senator Henry Mello in an informal group self-titled the Portuguese Caucus, which unfortunately does not exist any longer. During that session, 5 of the 6 members of the Portuguese Caucus strengthened their bonds with Portugal on a major visit to mainland Portugal and to the archipelago of the Azores. The 93-94 legislative session was significant in the history of the Portuguese participation in California state politics for at least 2 reasons. John Vasconcelos, who was beginning his 27th year in the legislature, Jim Costa, who was beginning his 15th year, and Rusty Reyes, who was beginning his 11th year, were joined by 2 newcomers, Fred Aguiar and Kathleen Vieira Honeycutt. Aguiar would serve for 3 terms, 93 to 98, representing portions of Los Angeles and San Bernardino counties, and would later return to Sacramento to serve as a high-ranking member of Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's cabinet. Honeycutt would serve 1 term, 93-94, representing portions of Venio, Kern, and San Bernardino counties, setting not only a first, but also, until just recently, the only woman elected. Now we have another one, which is our very good friend of the California Portuguese American Coalition and the Portuguese community, and that is Assembly person Cecilia Aguiar Curry. But until just a few years ago, I believe, Assemblywoman Cecilia Aguiar Curry was elected, I believe, about 8 years ago. So until she was elected, basically, we only had one woman, and that was Kathleen Vieira Honeycutt. The Bakersfield Californian ran a short article in its edition of the November 16th of 1992 entitled "Local Teacher Among Pioneers of Elected Women," leading with the revelation that California voters took 68 years after statehood to elect the first woman to the state legislature, I should say, and noting that Grace S. Doris of Bakersfield was one of the 4 women elected to the state assembly in 1918. And so the class of 1992 included Kathleen Vieira Honeycutt, and she is the 3rd woman to represent, at that time, Kern County in 74 years. Now, there have been others, obviously. And so those were some of the key figures. We have Mike Machado, we have John Dutra, we have Fred Aguiar, we have Kathleen Vieira Honeycutt, and we have, of course, John Arayes, better known as Rusty Arayes. And as I mentioned, of course, Representative Tony Coelho and his work that was done throughout Congress, and of course that has been done at a national level in many aspects of the American political life. The name Tony Coelho is synonymous with the Portuguese American community. And then we've had, of course, we had 3. We've had at one time 4. Now we again have 4 Portuguese Americans in Congress from California. And we'll talk about the 3 that no longer are there. From the left is Representative or former Congressman Devin Nunes, and Congressman Nunes was one of the youngest people to be elected to Congress in his 20s, and served for 20 years, just about 20 years in the U.S. Congress, has retired from Congress, and Representative former congressman as well, Dennis Cardoza, there in the center, and he also served several terms from the Merced area as well. And then to the far right there is Representative Richard Pombo, who also served, and actually all 3 of them served together at one time in Congress, along with Congressman Jim Costa. At one time, they were the first 4 to serve concurrently in the U.S. Congress. And it was kind of interesting because whether it be Representative Devin Nunes or Representative Dennis Cardoza, Representative Richard Pombo, Representative Jim Costa, all 4 of them from the Valley area. Of course, Richard Pombo kind of North Valley there into the Tracy area, but and then up into the hills there. But the others basically all in the central San Joaquin Valley, which there are, of course, various theories about that. And unfortunately, we don't have the time in this brief lecture to talk about that, but it's something that should be discussed. Right now in Congress, we have 4 Portuguese Americans serving. And of course, to the left there, Congressman Jim Costa, who has been in public service for over 40 years, I believe over 44, if I'm not mistaken. And next to him is recently elected Congressman John Duarte, also with roots in the archipelago of the Azores. Jim Costa, roots in the archipelago of the Azores in the Terceira Island. At this time, the California Portuguese American Coalition does not know the island, and that's not important. It's important that he's Portuguese and from the Azores, and that is Congressman John Duarte. Next to him is Congressman Eric Sulwell, not a very Portuguese name, we know, but 25% Portuguese, so a quarter Portuguese, like Congressman Miller in many years ago, 60 years ago, and 67 years ago, and he was he's elected from the Livermore, that area up in that area there, Livermore, Dublin area, and he is obviously very well also known in Congress, has been there for a while, has held some different committees, and he, as I said, is 1/4% Portuguese. This Portuguese side from the Azores and Madeira that went to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to mainland here, United States. And then, of course, on the right there, the far right there is Congressman David Valadão. who also served in the state legislature before going to Congress, and who is a son of immigrants. His parents were both immigrants from the island of Terceira. So it's kind of interesting that we have a son of immigrants, two grandsons of immigrants, and one great grandson of immigrants, from all of them with roots in the Azores, and Eric Solwell with roots in the Azores and Madeira. We could talk quite a bit more about state's political figures, and once again, right now we have two folks in the Portuguese, that are Portuguese background in the California State Assembly and the California Senate. Henry Stern, who is Portuguese from his mother's side, in the California State Senate, and Cecilia Aguiar Curry, who is Portuguese from her father's side, in the California State Assembly. So Cecilia Aguiar Curry traces her roots to the island of Terceira, and Henry Stern's family from the Portuguese side traces its roots to the islands of Faial and Flores, but mostly Faial, Flores and then Faial, most of it. And so just to let you know as we end that we do have indeed right now 144, and this number is changing because we find different Portuguese Americans that are elected that we do not know they're Portuguese American, especially because, as you can see there by those two featured women, and happy International Women's Day to everyone, all the women done such a great job and such a great power in the Portuguese American community. Many of the things that men take credit for, women have been doing, have been the backbone of many organizations, and including the political world of our Portuguese presence. And so Sue Zwellen and Cheryl Viegas Walker are two Portuguese Americans elected to municipalities in the state of California, and of course last name is not Portuguese. So we discover all the time, but that we know of and that we have record, there are 144 right now Californians who are of Portuguese background in California public service, whether it be at school boards and water boards and elected positions, obviously, and also some as superintendents that are elected of education at county levels. Also, we have some who are elected at, of course, the municipalities, at city council and mayors, and of course, supervisors of counties as well. And so it's an ongoing battle for the California Portuguese American Coalition, who is a co-sponsor of this event, to get all these names and to build this network of Californians who are of Portuguese background serving in the state of California at any level. And so as we end just a little bit, this is the California Portuguese American Coalition website. So it is a website, and just type it, Google California Portuguese American Coalition, it'll take you to it. It's a very friendly to use. Right now we're actually featuring the FLAD legislative interns, I should say, the legislative internships for the summer of 2023. It's a heck of an opportunity for young Portuguese Americans to do a paid internship. Go to our website. All the information is there, but it's due by March 10th. So in a couple of days, you must get in your information either today or tomorrow, or the 10th at the latest. And of course, we have other information there, including, if you go to our section of news, lots of different stories and lots of profiles of Portuguese Americans who are serving throughout the state of California. It's a way to keep everyone in touch and to keep that information available to those who are of Portuguese background or not and are interested in that. The California Portuguese American Coalition, in collaboration with PBBI, also puts forth, and sponsored by FLAD, the Luz American Development Foundation, a young Portuguese American Leadership Academy. We're looking forward to doing it this summer or early fall. We're working on dates right now that is best for young people. It'll be a paid internship, a grant will be given to those who participate. So it'll be like a 4-day via Zoom. And so you can participate from any part of the state, as long as you're a college student or just recently out of college, that's fine as well. I believe the ages are between 20 and 32. And so it is a wonderful opportunity to participate and to get a grant to help your studies or to help you in your life. Small grant, but it's worth not just the grant, but the wealth of information that you'll get. And basically, I believe at most it is like 12 hours, but they're very, very impactful 12 hours. The Leadership Academy put forth by the California Portuguese American Coalition. So all of this, as we build indeed all of the different levels of service that we need to be involved. It's wonderful to have 4 Portuguese Americans in Congress. It's wonderful that they are from the Central Valley. And I'm being a bit biased here, of course, being at Fresno State. But it is also just as wonderful to see folks at a state level. We are lacking right now in Portuguese Americans in the state assembly. We only have 1. There is no reason for us not to have 4 or 5. Also, at the state Senate, we only have 1. We'd love to have 2 or 3. And even at, of course, the local level. And that is the work that also needs to be done. It would be very, very interesting if we as a community could come together and create some kind of a fund that would allow those students who are doing a master's, who are maybe in history or political science or sociology, and to do a study, especially in history and political science, to do a master's thesis on getting information and acquiring the information that we need. It's a lot of work, it's meticulous work, but we believe that there have been Portuguese Americans elected at the local office in the 1800s. And there's a name here and a name there, but we do not have a study. And I think that is something that both the foundations and the Azorian and the Portuguese government should fund, along with the community itself, because that is a wealth of information to have this in a book form, just like we have the Californians, Portuguese politicians, a century of legislative service. So thank you all for joining us. We will be here tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning as we continue to talk about Portuguese Immigrant Week in California. And we'll talk about the role of the church in the Portuguese community, the role of the Catholic Church, of course, in the community in California. That will be tomorrow at 8 o'clock. And this evening at 5, we are going to be talking about Portuguese culinary experiences throughout the state of California with a guest. So be in tune for that as well. We thank you all for joining us on behalf of the California Portuguese American Coalition that sponsored today's event, along with FLAD, the Luso-American Education Foundation, and the PFSA, Portuguese Fraternal Society of America, and of course, the Luso-American Development Foundation, that is FLAD, from Lisbon, Portugal. Thank you all so much for joining us on behalf of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno. Happy Portuguese Immigrant Week, everyone. Take care.